afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Munday. I'm one of the lead professional officers with Unite Union in the health sector. I'm based in the Northwest, currently in the Manchester area, but I work across England and especially the Northwest, Northeast Yorkshire and Humber regions for the health sector. I've been doing a few of these presentations and we'll just talk about the first few in a second. So just an introduction to this update, what we're going to cover today. This is the third webinar that we've done aimed at Unite reps in the NHS. Interestingly, the first three have been focused on English issues, which I kind of apologise to for those that aren't in England, but you'll guess, why that's the case with this situation that we're discussing today. The first session that I did was on Annex 31. That was a new annex to the NHS jobs, to the Terms and Conditions of Service Handbook, and it's a really helpful annex for reps. Sounds a bit boring when I say Annex 31, but it is something that's worth having a look at. So I would encourage you to go back and watch that session if you've not heard it already. And actually, it goes quite nicely in parallel with what we're talking about today in some respects. And the second session we did a couple of months ago was on how best to write job descriptions with a focus on what's needed for NHS job evaluation scheme. The reason that we focused on that was obviously we encourage our members to ensure that their job descriptions are up to date, should be reviewed as a minimum every 3 years. And obviously it's good to know how to write a good job description if you want to get your job description up to date. Today's session, however, is focused on the NHS Staff Standards, which were launched on the 6th of July 2026. And you can catch up with any of the previous presentations, and this one will be recorded and put on there as well on the website, which is there. Just to also say, I am recording the session. The only thing that we will put on the website is a recording of the presentation. It won't have any of your faces or any of your contributions, because when we get to the Q&A, I won't share that bit of the recording, but I will use it after today just to get a collection of all the questions that are asked and put on all the answers on the website. You'll also get a copy, you get a link to where you can get a copy of these presentation slides after today's event. So without further ado, the NHS Staff Standards, hopefully some of you may have heard about this. This presentation is about 34 slides, I think, so it's quite heavy, but hopefully it gives you lots of really good, deep information about the new staff standards. Just to say, I'm not going to take questions as we go along, but if you do want to ask any questions, I'd recommend either typing them in the chat as we go along or just making a note of them and asking them at the end. So the NHS Staff Standards, the Department of Health and Social Care 10-year plan committed to developing a new set of staff standards, which would outline minimum standards for employment across a range of areas aimed at improving staff experience. The standards set out the actions employers must take to deliver them and what staff can expect at work as a result. So today we're going to cover an overview explaining why the staff standards have been introduced, how they'll be used, and what each standard means in practice. You can view the full online staff standards online, which includes information setting out the detailed requirements for each employers, and I'll cover that detailed information again at the end of the presentation. The NHS Staff Standards, they focus on key areas that members and wider NHS staff have said matter the most. So the 6 key areas: line management, including how best to support line managers; health and well-being, which includes physical environment, rest spaces, occupational health and well-being support; preventing and reducing violence against staff; championing sexual safety; tackling racism; and promoting flexible working. And the standards have been developed by the DHSC and NHS England, working closely with employers and trade unions through the Social Partnership Forum, and are intended to be implemented locally through partnership working. In terms of Unite involvement in this, we have been involved through the National SPF. The officer that led on that involvement was Richard Munn, one of my colleagues, my manager, a national officer in the health sector, and he was involved in developing this. The aim is to raise the profile of staff experience, giving it the same priority as other important areas like finance and operational priorities, and to help all NHS staff have a more consistent positive experience. The standards will be different from other staff experience initiatives because performance against them will be measured with clear action taken when they're not being delivered. They set a minimum expectation, but it's said these are just the starting point with the plan to refine them and the way they are measured against in future years. The standards are for NHS staff, employers and leaders and should be used alongside existing workforce policies and initiatives to support implementation. And the standards will apply to secondary care, which includes acute mental health, ambulance services, and community health care. And I just want to say at this point, I suppose one of the dangers with anything like this is I can sit here and say, this is something wonderful and new that's going to make everyone's lives better. And then actually, is it implemented? Is it done? Does it make people's lives better? There are a few things that hopefully will mean that this is sort of implemented properly, but it will require, I'm sure, reps locally championing this kind of stuff that we're going to talk about today. And again, hopefully this is a way of encouraging you guys to at least know about this so you can look at how it can be implemented locally. So just moving on, why are the standards being introduced? Well, staff experience directly impacts staff retention and absenteeism, and that ultimately affects quality of patient care and overall organisational performance. Over recent years, the NHS has introduced a range of initiatives to improve staff experience, and one of which is the NHS People Promise. Some organisations have made real improvements using the NHS People Promise framework and shown what's possible when staff are well supported. However, progress has been uneven across the NHS. Staff experience still varies widely, and good practice is not consistently implemented in all organisations. The staff standards are being introduced to help fix this. They set a clear national requirement for what staff should be able to expect at work, no matter which organisation they work for. The staff standards will work alongside and complement initiatives like the NHS People Promise, providing a clear framework for employers to focus on and through which they will be measured. So unlike previous initiatives, implementation of the staff standards will be compulsory, and how well each provider meets the 6 standards will be measured. If an employer does not do well, this will be taken into account when looking at how the organisation is performing overall, and this will be done through a new score for the standards in the NHS Oversight Framework. This is a national system used to check how organisations are performing against important priorities, including these new staff standards. So just to sort of go on that issue, under this system, organisations are placed into one of 5 groups based on how well they're doing. That's the NHS Oversight Framework stuff. Those that are doing well have more freedom to make decisions and have less involvement from NHS England, while organisations facing more challenges receive additional support and closer engagement to help them improve. Staff can see how their organisation is performing on the NHS Oversight Framework segmentation and league tables page. Sounds like an exciting web page, that, doesn't it? This includes dashboards for acute, ambulance, mental health and community healthcare. I know I've seen at least one person that's joined today might recognise this page because it's from their employer. I've given an example of an ambulance trust there. You can go into the page, you can look at lots of different information about how your employer is performing against a number of different things. And in the future, that will include how they are performing against these new NHS staff standards. So again, another piece of homework potentially after today's session. Have a look at this webpage, just have a see what your trust is reporting. There's a few things to think about that. One is obviously, hopefully the information is accurate, they're reporting correctly how they're getting along, and that can then be used as, say, benchmarking for improvement. But also, if you feel like your trust isn't quite reporting the truth there, something else to think about in terms of you continuing engagement with your employer. So putting the standards into practice locally, they are set at a national level, but they need to be put into practice locally. They set clear expectations for employers, but staff also have an important role to play in creating a positive culture and workplace. Employers are accountable for meeting the standards themselves. However, their successful delivery relies on partnership with staff locally, recognising the shared role staff play in shaping culture, feeding back on experience and driving improvement. Future versions of the standards may explore options to formalise this role of staff in a further or a different way. Employers and trade union representatives should work together through the local partnership arrangements to apply the standards in ways that fit local services, staff needs, and how different organisations work. This includes boards working with trade unions to provide assurance on delivery of the standards and to ensure that the staff voice shapes local improvements. The standards are not intended to cut across or replace staff experience programmes that organisations have in place already and are working well. Rather, they should complement them. So again, organisations shouldn't be using this as a catalyst to say we're going to stop doing this good practice in future because we've now got this new thing. It should be that you can think about how you implement these things in a way where good practice is respected and continued. But as you probably expect, there's lots of organisations out there that don't meet the levels, the requirements that our members should expect. And therefore, hopefully, the staff standards will help as a way to kind of, further that going forward. So we're now going to go on to the 6 different staff standards themselves. Each standard has kind of an introduction statement, information about the standard, information about what staff should expect to see, and then information about how it should be measured locally. So each one is, again, quite weighty, but hopefully having this level of detail, although it's not the most level of detail, will help you in terms of how you can implement this locally. So the first one, the line management staff standard, this is a little bit different, and I'll tell you why that's a little bit different on the next slide. But staff can expect supportive, fair, developmental and compassionate line management enabled by employer support for line managers to help staff to perform well, feel valued and fulfil their potential. So about this standard, line managers play a big role in how people feel at work. The standard's about making sure staff are supported by the line managers, that line managers are properly supported by their organisation to provide high quality line management to their teams. We know from the 2025 NHS Staff Survey results that there's already a lot of good line management across the NHS. However, we need to build on this and ensure that it is consistently true for all staff. This standard recognises that wider pressures, limited time and poor systems can make good line management difficult. The standard is about changing that by creating a culture where line management is valued, supported and properly resourced by organisations. So all staff experience fair, consistent and compassionate management. So what to expect, and this is where this one is different. All the other staff standards, it tells us about what staff should expect. But the line management staff standard also tells us about what line managers can expect as well. So line managers should expect their employer to help them to do their job well. This means line managers should expect training and development to help them manage people effectively, especially for those new to line management, enough time in their job to carry out line management responsibilities properly, simple, accessible HR policies and processes that help rather than hinder, supervision, advice and support from their own manager, an opportunity to give feedback to their employer about what helps or gets in the way of supporting staff. So you probably read them, and this is true across all the standards. You won't read any of them and think, wow, this is unbelievable new information that's absolutely blown my mind. A lot of this is the common sense stuff that should be happening now. Obviously, it's helpful to have it in a place where people should be doing it and a place where people should be monitoring that it's being done. So the standard recognises that line managers are staff too, and it's important about improving systems and support so line managers can support their teams consistently and compassionately. So what to expect as a member of staff, and this is where we go back to how all the other staff standards are reported on. Under this standard, staff should expect that their line manager listens to them and takes their concerns seriously, treats them fairly with respect and compassion, carries out regular, meaningful appraisals with feedback that helps them do their job, provides them with support for issues when they need it, gives them clear objectives and regular feedback, actively supports their development and career progression, creates a team environment where everyone feels safe to speak up, and takes action when problems arise and escalates issues when needed. So staff should also feel part of a team with shared goals, where differences are handled constructively and everyone is treated with respect. Again, it should not be, mind-bending stuff, this. It should be the common sense thing that should be happening already. Why this matters. Line management has a big impact on how people feel at work. We know that from lots and lots of surveys, not just in the NHS, but across lots of employers. Good line management helps staff feel listened to, supported, and valued. Poor or consistent line management can lead to stress, low morale, people leaving their jobs, teams struggling to work well together. When line managers are properly supported, they're better able to support their teams. It leads to clear objectives, better feedback, stronger teamwork, safer, more inclusive working environments. We also know it helps mitigate against problematic senior management. You can have employers that have poor senior management, which is saved by really good line management, or is at least, helped significantly by good line management. So there is a real benefit, to investing and supporting good line management. This standard also matters because good line management underpins the other staff standards. So progress on tackling racism, reducing violence, championing safety, supportive, flexible working, and improving health and well-being all depend on line managers having the time, confidence, and support to act. By valuing line management and giving it the attention and resource it deserves, the NHS can improve staff experience more consistently and create workplaces where people can do their best work and want to stay. So I'm going to just do measured in a second. I'm just going to try and mute a couple of people because there's a few sounds coming through. There we go. So how will this be measured? Success against the standard will be measured by what staff have to say about their experience of their line manager. And you'll hear this said quite a few times today. This will be done through the NHS Staff Survey, including questions on appraisals and whether they help staff agree clear objectives for their work and how valued they feel their work is by their organisation, career development and whether staff feel like they've got access to the right opportunities to develop their potential, whether their line manager takes a positive interest in their well-being and whether they will help with any problems faced in a compassionate way, and their team and whether they feel a valued member of the wider team with a set of shared goals. So obviously you can actually go and check how your organisation is potentially doing for some of those already today by looking at last year's NHS Staff Survey results. So even though the standards are new, you can still kind of check how your organisation is doing against them already. So that was line management. We're now going to go on to the second of the six, health and wellbeing staff standard. So again, the overall statement on this, staff can expect their organisation to protect their health, safety and wellbeing at work. Employers are responsible for supporting staff wellbeing, preventing ill health associated with work and helping staff to feel safe, cared for and able to perform well. So about this standard is about making sure that the NHS organisations are proactively supporting the health and wellbeing of the staff and taking action to prevent work-related illnesses. It's important that organisations care for staff and prioritise their wellbeing so that they feel safe, well and able to perform their roles. And there is a definite nasty irony that NHS organisations that are set up to help and look after people can often be a place of ill health when it comes to their own employees. The 2025 NHS Staff Survey shows us that many NHS employees have experienced physical and psychological impacts as a result of their work, and not enough staff feel that their organisation takes positive action on health and wellbeing. There's a wealth of existing guidance and frameworks around keeping staff safe, improving staff wellbeing in the NHS, yet this is fragmented, lacks a coordinated approach to staff safety and lacks the ability to enforce action. This standard builds on existing expectations requiring organisations to make ambitious progress across wider determinants of staff safety, health and wellbeing and sets clear expectations on employers to take a preventative, data-driven and accountable approach to staff health and wellbeing. So what to expect as a member of staff? You should expect the organisation to actively promote health, safety and wellbeing at work, clear leadership, accountability for staff wellbeing, including oversight at board level, an evidence-based and needs-driven local health and wellbeing approach shaped by staff feedback, data and partnership working, that basic wellbeing needs are met, including to rest, eat and drink while at work with arrangements that are suitable to different operational settings, managers who are trained to support health and wellbeing and to have regular supportive conversations, fair and inclusive support, including reasonable adjustments for disabled staff and those with long-term conditions, support for pregnant and breastfeeding staff, support for those experiencing the perimenopause or menopause, access to occupational health and wellbeing support with recommendations acted upon, and ongoing improvements of staff health and wellbeing outcomes informed by workforce data and staff experience. So again, you've probably seen lots of those things mentioned in different places over the last few years, but the staff standard is one way to hopefully draw these into one place with, again, the expectation that employers should do this. So why this matters, again, this won't be surprising to any of you. The health, safety and wellbeing of NHS staff is fundamental to delivering safe, high-quality patient care. The NHS Staff Survey shows persistent levels of work-related stress and burnout, alongside declining confidence that organisations take positive action on wellbeing. This standard makes it clear that employers should not just react when staff are struggling, but take action earlier to keep people well. It focuses on using information and evidence to spot problems, taking responsibility at leadership level, improving day-to-day working conditions, supporting managers, and making sure staff can get the right health and wellbeing support when they need it. This helps keep staff safe, well, and able to do their jobs. Injury and harm caused while working and poor wellbeing leads to absenteeism and staff leaving their roles. Preventing harm and protecting staff wellbeing improves retention and morale and has positive benefits for patient care. So how will this be measured? Again, NHS Staff Survey being mentioned here, looking at questions on feel their organisation takes positive action on health and wellbeing, have felt unwell in the past 12 months due to work-related stress, and feel burnout because of their work. So that's the health and safety one. Moving now on to the third one, violence prevention and reduction. Again, this overall statement, staff have a right to feel safe and supported at work in an environment that takes meaningful action to prevent and reduce violence, aggression, intimidation or abuse in any form. Staff should have access to simple, safe and supportive channels for reporting violence in the workplace, timely, compassionate support after any violent or harmful incident, and the right training to equip them with the confidence and knowledge to keep themselves and others stay safe. So about this standard, all NHS staff deserve to feel safe at work without fear of violence, aggression or abuse in any form. We know from the 2025 NHS Staff Survey results that a number of staff who experience violence while working in the NHS continues, sadly, to rise. The Violence Prevention and Reduction Staff Standard will build on the work already underway in this area in partnership with NHS employers and trade unions, and this includes preventing and reducing violence, aggression, intimidation or abuse in any form. This standard sets out targeted action that employers must take to prevent and reduce violence and abuse, as well as work with partners in the police and elsewhere to create a culture whereby violence against NHS staff is unacceptable. So what to expect of the member of staff? Under this standard, staff should expect their employer to implement and embed the 2024 Violence Prevention and Reduction Standard, which helps NHS organisations to assess and manage risks around violence so that staff feel safe, supported and empowered to report violence, and so their employer can measure and improve their response to violence. Accessible reporting systems to help them report any incidents of violence, access to high-quality post-incident psychological and welfare support from the manager who understands how to ensure staff receive post-incident support and where to signpost staff to, HR policies and procedures that provide them with the right support following incidents and during any investigations, appropriate training to equip them with the confidence and knowledge to keep themselves and others safe, and opportunities for staff to feed back to their employer so that it can shape and contribute lived experience to any changes planned in their organisation. Just to highlight on this slide, as there's been with a few in the past and in the future, there are some links that are embedded on the slide. The URL links are included at the bottom of the slides relevant to that, so you can look at that information further. So why does it matter? All NHS staff should feel safe at work without fear of violence or abuse. The NHS Staff Survey for 25 shows that violence against NHS staff continues to be a major issue. In the last 12 months, 14.47% of staff reported that they had experienced at least one incident of physical violence from patients, service users or members of the public. This figure has increased from 2024, making it clear that there's a much more to do to tackle this issue. And unfortunately, this is true on a lot of the staff standards. You'll notice that it says this problem is getting worse, and whilst it might not look percentage-wise terms, a lot, it obviously is a lot in terms of the individual instances where this happens in a massive organisational structure. So staff must know that they're listened to and that appropriate action will be taken. The staff standard aims to ensure that NHS staff can safely report violence in the workplace, receive timely and compassionate support, receive the right training they need to feel confident and keep themselves and colleagues safe. So how will it be measured? Back to the NHS staff survey. Staff have including questions on whether staff have personally experienced physical violence at work from patients, service users, their relatives, or other members of the public, managers, or other colleagues, and they or a colleague have reported any instance of physical violence at work. So I think this is the fourth now, championing sexual safety staff standard. So staff have a right to feel safe and supported at work in an environment that is free from sexual harassment, abuse, and unwanted or inappropriate sexual behaviours. Staff can expect their organisation to take clear, consistent action to prevent sexual misconduct and harassment, promote a culture of transparency and openness that ensures incidents are reported and acted upon promptly and appropriately, and training to be provided on how to recognise and report inappropriate behaviours, an approach that centres on the victim with support provided to those affected, and that lessons are learned to reduce the risk of future incidents. About the standard, it sets out how to make sure that staff are able to go into their workplace and feel safe and protected from inappropriate behaviour. The 2025 NHS staff survey results about unwanted behaviour of a sexual nature shows there is still a problem that has to be tackled, and it's unacceptable that staff should be subject to these behaviours. So it's about reinforcing the work that's already underway by NHS organisations in championing sexual safety, and it sets out what organisations must do to prevent unwanted sexual incidents, how staff should be protected and supported, and how to learn from such incidents so staff are able to work in an environment free from sexual harassment, abuse, and unwanted sexual behaviours. Again, some organisations, and especially, colleagues in the ambulance sector, will recognise that there has been work that's been done across the sector. But again, that is quite patchy in terms of across the NHS, and more needs to be done to improve this issue for our members. So what to expect as a member of staff? You should expect that your employer to uphold the 10 principles of the NHS Sexual Safety Charter, to be able to work in an environment where they're not subjected to any form of sexual abuse, harassment, or inappropriate comments, and that they feel safe in their workplace. That all investigators of sexual misconduct allegations are specially trained for this role. For boards and leaders to work to track progress on tackling sexual misconduct and ensure that all policies and procedures are maintained and updated. That everyone, no matter what grade, should complete the Understanding Sexual Misconduct in the Workplace e-learning. That all staff are familiar with the Sexual Misconduct People framework, so that they understand how to recognise and report misconduct. That robust staff policies are in place so individual staff do not suffer any detriment as a result of reporting any concerns about behaviour, and that any relevant concerns about behaviour from other members of staff, where appropriate, are shared with future employers and host organisations. Why it matters: the 25 NHS staff survey results show that unwanted behaviours of a sexual nature are still a major issue. In the last 12 months, 3.5% of staff reported that they'd been a target of unwanted behaviours in the workplace from staff or colleagues. And although this figure has seen a reduction from 3.68 in 23, the first year of reporting, it's clear that there's much more to be done to tackle this issue. We want staff to be able to come to work and feel confident that they're going into a place of safety, free from inappropriate behaviours from either colleagues or members of the public. And if staff do encounter these behaviours, then they must have the assurances that their concerns and complaints will be listened to. And staff must know that they will be listened to, appropriate action will be taken, and that they will be supported throughout any processes. How it's going to be measured: again, the NHS staff survey, including questions on how many times they've been a target of unwanted behaviour of a sexual nature in the workplace, and this can include offensive or inappropriate conversation, including jokes, touching or assault, and whether the behaviour is from other staff. On to the fifth staff standard, tackling racism. Staff should feel safe and supported at work in an environment where their organisation takes sustained and meaningful action to prevent all instances of racism and discrimination in the workplace. So all staff should expect to experience a safe working environment free from racism and discrimination. Data from multiple sources, such as the staff survey, shows that ethnic minority staff have poorer experiences at work. This standard's about ensuring all NHS organisations take robust and meaningful action to foster positive change in organisational cultures. to improve experiences and outcomes for ethnic minority staff. And this standard will help to embed a consistent preventative approach across all the NHS organisations that not only reduces but tackles the existence of racism and the culture and conditions that have allowed this to thrive across the NHS. So what to expect as a member of staff? You should expect to be able to work in an inclusive team environment where they're treated fairly, listened to, and have their concerns taken seriously. Clear consequences for racist behaviour, whether that's from patients, relatives, or other members of staff. Managers and board to take meaningful action if problems arise and escalate issues where needed. To have access to simple, accessible HR policies and processes that prioritise wellbeing and restorative support. Updated grievance, disciplinary, investigative processes that are responsive to the experiences of racism and are unbiased. To have opportunities where staff can safely give feedback to their employer to improve and inform local plans, particularly where they have lived experience. That their organisation's board is accountable for tackling racism with consequences for poor performance, and that their organisation will work to implement inclusive recruitment and talent management practices by developing a recruitment and career progression plan that ensures equity of opportunity for all staff, but particularly ethnic minority staff. So why does it matter? Compared to white staff, ethnic minority staff face greater levels of bullying and harassment, are significantly less likely to be appointed to roles from shortlisting, and have a level of board and senior leadership representation that is significantly below their overall level in the NHS workforce. 2025 NHS Staff Survey shows that instances of staff experiencing discrimination at work from patients, their families and the general public, managers or other colleagues had increased again and are higher among ethnic minority staff compared to white staff. Given these inequalities, this standard sets out the minimum national expectations for how all NHS organisations must prioritise, prevent, respond to and learn from incidents of racism in the workplace. It will encourage NHS organisations to proactively work to eliminate the condition in which racism and racist behaviour thrives. So how will it be measured? Again, through the NHS Staff Survey, including questions on career progression in their organisation and specific data on this for staff members from an ethnic minority background and other protected characteristics like gender, religion, sexual orientation and disability. Whether staff have experienced harassment, bullying or abuse at work from patients or service users, their relatives or other members of the public, and from managers or other colleagues. Whether staff have experienced discrimination at work from patients or service users, their relatives or other members of the public, and from managers, team leaders or other colleagues. So we're now going to move on to the sixth staff standard, promoting flexible working staff standard. So NHS staff can expect flexible working, flexibility in how, where and when they work, to be openly encouraged and supported, fairly and equitably considered and embedded into everyday practice, creating a flexible first culture rather than treated as an exception. Requests must be considered objectively and not unreasonably refused, and where they cannot be agreed, alternatives will be explored. So flexible working in the NHS helps staff manage their lives, boosts wellbeing and improves retention and patient care. This standard is about NHS organisations creating a positive, fair and transparent culture in which flexible working is normalised as part of everyday operational practice, and this may include changes to working patterns, hours and roles and or the location in which work takes place. Terms used to refer to flexible working could also include agile, hybrid, dynamic, smart and remote and home working. It's intended to ensure that flexible working is proactively offered, openly discussed and consistently applied from job adverts and interviews through workforce planning, appraisal and ongoing conversations between staff and managers. It also makes clear that senior leaders have responsibility for creating the conditions that empower staff to make requests and that enable managers and leaders to respond to both staff needs and service requirements. So what is the expectation that staff can have? Flexible working to be openly encouraged, supported and promoted by their organisation's board and leaders. Their organisation to capture and review information about flexible working requests and outcomes so that practice can be improved over time and shared transparently with staff. That requests for flexible working are considered objectively and not unreasonably refused, and where a request cannot be agreed, alternative options are explored with the requester. Flexible working is considered as part of normal workforce planning and will be option in all job adverts. Approaches to flexible working recognise that what is possible will vary depending on roles, services and operational context. decisions and outcomes to be handled in a way that is fair, transparent, and consistent, and for informal arrangements to be regularly reviewed, and the implementation of preference-based team e-rostering for all frontline workers where operationally appropriate. So why does it matter? While there have been some improvements in relation to flexible working in the NHS, there's still a long way to go to ensure all staff have fair and equitable access, which is consistently felt by all staff across the NHS. Flexible working supports recruitment and retention across the NHS, helping organisations build long-term workforce capability and capacity. It can also improve staff wellbeing and experience, which in turn supports productivity and the sustainability of NHS services. And by setting clear, consistent expectations, this standard is intended to reduce variation in experience for staff and ensure flexible working is a normal part of working life across the NHS, rather than something that depends on where they work or who they work for. Again, how will it be measured? So the NHS staff survey questions: how satisfied staff are with the opportunities for flexible working patterns, how committed their organisation is to helping you balance your work and home life, and whether they can approach their immediate manager to talk openly about flexible working. So we've gone through quite quickly the six staff standards that have been introduced in July. What we've focused on so far is the name of the standard, kind of background, why it's there, and how it will be reviewed, check that it's been implemented. One of the things that I've not covered and not planning to cover today is the detailed requirements that employers have been given in guidance on how they should implement each of these standards. I'm sure you'll appreciate that to do that in a session that's under an hour would be wholly impossible. Also, to kind of do that without doing this front loading of the conversation would also probably not make much sense. So I think what I've kind of done today, like I say, is gone through the starting conversation about NHS staff standards. A question that I've got for you guys as people watching this session is, if you found that bit helpful, but you feel that you need more detailed information going forward, then kind of ask for that, because what we can do is an extra session that looks at either detailed information about all six, or we maybe try and focus on a couple and do detailed information. Because what I appreciate is you guys getting more than an hour from work is really, really difficult. So that's why we kind of chunked it down in this way. So just to sort of go through this slide, we focused on what staff can expect, why it matters, how it will be measured in terms of the new standards. Alongside this, the DHSC has also produced guidance for employers, which goes into much greater detail. Once you've had the chance to think about information today, let's look at this information in terms of what's next. So as an example, to demonstrate the detail in the line management staff standard, the guidance that they've produced highlights the standard, its purpose, actions for employers, bullet list about what employers should be doing, the context, metrics to be used. So it goes through, for example, this is what the NHS staff survey says, this is what ESR should say, this is what other metrics that you maybe have access to, this is what your dashboard should show, all that kind of thing. It goes through the legal duties behind each of the standards, and it has links to those legal duties on the web page, so people can say, oh, well, there's this legal duty required around this standard, therefore I can go into that duty and look what it says, and then how the standard relates to the staff rights and pledges in the NHS Constitution. And again, it's important to kind of return to that point today. The six things that we're talking about today, the NHS has already said that these things should be priorities that staff experience, that they benefit from, that they should expect. One of the problems is that happening? Is that being translated into actual real life impacts felt by employees, felt by our members? What we know from the feedback from our members is it's not in as many ways as it needs to. So the NHS staff standard work is just one way of us trying to push organisations to have a greater responsibility to do something about these things. And again, as I've said probably in the first and second sessions on this, it's eminently easy for me to sit here over 42 minutes and say, this is what's happening. You guys go back into the workplace and everything will be fine. You know, it's easy to do that, but there's the full expectation and understanding that actually that next bit is the difficult bit, going back into the workplace, getting employers to do this kind of stuff. And I suppose, hopefully, one thing that's come across from the conversation, the very one-sided conversation that we've had so far today, is very much kind of that we're trying to ensure that there are things in place that mean that employers have to do better, have to be seen to do better, have to demonstrate that they're doing better. And like I say, the next thing that you maybe need to think about is looking at this extended guidance for what employers should specifically do locally to implement these things. So that's the end of the presentation as it is today.